everybody. How are you? My name is April McGrath Lynch. I'm the city manager for the city of Ferndale, and up here is Joe Calcho. Both of us are going to be offering information tonight regarding what we refer to as ballot 2 and 3. We're going to start why we're calling that first. You'll notice over on the table we have a lot of resources, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But the ballot, the first proposal on the ballot is for the state's proposal, which is proposal number 1 on our ballot. Ours is number 2 and number 3. So what we're here to talk about tonight is ballot 2 and 3. 2 is the renewal of the Headley, and number 3 is for the street and park improvements. And we'll talk about those individually yet tonight. Joe and I are here to answer as many questions as we can for all of you who are here interested. We have actually prepared frequently asked questions that we've already heard throughout the community, and we will be discussing those, but also allowing you an opportunity as well to ask questions throughout. I believe you all have note cards. We ask that you write your questions down. Often we find that as you're throughout the presentation, you might have questions that either are answered or that haven't been answered, but at least you can remember that's the question you had and put on your card, and we have staff who are going to go around and collect those cards as well at the end. As we go through this proposal, as we go through the information on both proposals, there are 2 key points that we want you to know throughout. The first one is so important to remember that as it relates to the Headley renewal, that if you are currently very happy and love the services that the city of Ferndale provides, that we need that renewal again, because that's where we are right now. The capacity that we have is at the current funding levels we have, and we will talk throughout this evening about why that is and why we still need that renewal. The second key point is in the street and park bond request. That is also renewal, but interestingly enough, that renewal is being requested at actually 1 mil lower than you're paying today. So that is the 2 key points that you want at the end of the day. Approving both renewals, actually, you will see a 1 mil decrease on your taxes that you in today's tax bill. Does that make sense so far? And we'll go through all the information for that. So a little bit of a history, very short, brief history. In May of 2011, the voters of Ferndale did approve a heavy override. What that allowed the current city council at the time was to go up to 5.45 mil increase to get us to the 20 that we were allowed. You did approve that in 2011 in May, and the basis for that was a long process where they had a Blue Ribbon Finance Committee that looked at our finances and took a look at what was happening with the city of Ferndale and the revenue stream that we were having, and gave recommendations to city council. They did a lot of research. They spent a lot of time with all of the options, and that at the time seemed the best option to bring forward. Fortunately, our residents did approve that heavily, and as we near the sunset, which is at the end of this current year, 2015. Council asked staff again to bring back recommendations of what do we do now, because we're still not at the revenue levels that we were in 2010. And the staff looked at our options and realized that really our only other option again was to renew the Headley. And so we brought forth a recommendation to City Council and requested that we go back to the voters and ask for a continuation of the current Headley override. And I believe in March, Council approved. It might have been February. Council did approve putting a ballot question on, or a proposal question on the current ballot for May 5th. And that is where we are today, is asking again for the Headley renewal. With that, we have again listed about 5 or 6 questions that seem to come up the most. We're just going to answer those right away. And then from that point forward and give you the information we have, we'll have an opportunity for other questions to be asked as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. I think everybody's here for one reason. They want to know, what is this going to cost me? And the bottom line is the Headley renewal, as we're asking, is at the current level you are right now. So you will see no millage increase by renewing this Headley. It stays at 5.452. And in fact, it's important to note that with the first request in 2011, that council actually had put the ability to go up to 5.4552. And it took council up until year 4 to actually go to the full Headley. And so while for the first 5 years we had to increasingly go up because we lost so much taxable value, which we actually will talk about in the next few minutes, We're hoping it will go the other way, whereas our revenue increases slightly, that we can take a look and keep modifying that 5.4552 and actually go down. So it took, again, 4 years to get to the very top, and we've leveled off. Now we're hoping as we move forward in the next few years, we can start to go back down and keep decreasing that. But again, it will depend on revenues, of which we'll talk about in just a second, and all other factors. But for the most part, for right now, your millage is going to, the millage rate will stay the same. As it relates to, instead of kind of going back and forth and just talking about proposal 2 and proposal 3, we're going to talk about them both together. So when you take a look at the streets and park millage, you're actually going to see a decrease in the mill rate over time. And so what you would actually look at is we're currently paying 6.4565, but then we're actually going to be reducing that to the average life of the bond payment of 5.43 mils. So you're actually going to be looking at a decrease. So I think with that, I'm going to ask Joe to talk a little bit about one of the biggest questions we have is the first time you asked us for the heavy, it was only for 5 years, and now you're asking for 10, and why is that? So I'm going to let Joe talk a little bit about why why we're asking for 10 years this time.
Thanks, April. Yeah, so this has been the most popular question that we've received to date about these two proposals is why 10 years? And so what we did is we put together a chart that you can also walk through at your own time tonight and check it out over there in the middle. But here we have a chart. We date it back to 2007. And you'll notice in 2007 we're at this funding level right here. We're going up. But after the recession hit, between then and now, we've lost almost 25% of our taxable value. Now that 25%, that translates into about $2.6 million. That's lost revenues and property taxes. So that's where we're at today. This green is what we actually receive without the Headley override. And this blue is that gap that the Headley override fills. You'll notice with the two, we're back at about where we were back in 2007. So that's where we're at today. Now projecting yourself out 10 years, we have to factor in Michigan's tax law. Michigan has two significant tax legislation that limits the amount of revenues a city can earn in a year through property taxes. One is Proposal A, and the other one is the Headley Amendment. Those two amendments cap the city's ability to increase revenues to the rate of inflation. So what does that mean? That means that hopefully everybody's taxable value is going up and there's sunny days ahead. And let's just say an easy number out there is 10%. So if our taxable value increases at 10% year after year after year and everyone's homes are just looking great and our market's wonderful, the city is limited to the rate of inflation. Now, as you see here, the average rate of inflation is about 1.8%, and that's going back 15 years. So we think that's what we can reasonably expect it to remain at about, give or take a couple percentage points. So projecting out at 1.8% increases in value 10 years out, the city will be able to recoup about $1.5 million. That's what we could reasonably expect to recoup to project out 10 years. So in 4 years, we lost $2.6 million in value from property tax revenues. After 10 years, we could expect to only recoup about $1.5 million due to the constraints of the Michigan tax law. I'd also there was two more pieces I wanted to point out to complement that. This also assumes a rosy outlook for 10 years. This doesn't assume speed bumps. This doesn't assume a 2009 happens again in 2019. This assumes that Michigan's economy and our region's economy and our city's economy steadily grows and remains healthy for 10 years out. So even in the best case scenario, 10 years out, we can reasonably expect to recoup 1.5 of the 2.6 we've lost 10 years from now. And so that's the math behind this, and that really sums up why we would recommend to council to consider putting this on the ballot for 10 years.
I think there was a budget chart that we had one year, I think it was last year, that shows that in 2010, that we're still $1 million less than we were in 2010. So that's what, even with the full Headley, we still had to cut $1 million. So that's how much taxable value affected our overall budget. So that's another reason why it's so important that we continue to have the override for at least the next 10 years until we're able to get to the levels that we were back in actually 2007.
So I just wanted to point out that one more piece too. What the Headley override does is allows us to levy up to the 5.4552 miles. So you'll notice what council has done, if we go back since this first 5 year was put in place. In 2012, they could have levied up to the 5.4. They chose to levy at 3. You'll notice that 2013, we're still under the full. We don't really hit the full till last year and then the last 2 years. So 2 of the 5 years we've gotten to the point, as you saw, we lost the 2.6 million where we had to begin to try to recoup that to balance against the expenses. What the 10 years also allows us to do is to do projected budgeting. So council has asked staff to work on long-term budget models, 3-year budget models. We can't really do that because the revenues are always going to be uncertain. So a 10-year model helps us consider what factors there are in the environment, and those factors may or may not influence what rate they may or may not choose to levy.
I think another key factor that we need to remember is that this was our first fiscal year that our taxable value actually was in the positive and not the negative. So all of the years, 12, 13, and I believe 14, we were at negative property value increase. So this is the very first fiscal year that we actually had a bump up in taxable value. So that also helps kind of paint the picture of where we are. So beyond the whys, how much is this going to cost us, and why 10 years? I think the other question is, well, what have you done in the last 5 years with the money we gave you? And we actually, because this community approved the heavy override, we were able to be very concentrated and very thoughtful in how we evaluated all of our essential services, rather than having to hurry up and rush and lay off a whole bunch of our people that we already had done in 2010. I believe we saw a 30% reduction in our workforce. And that has pretty much remained consistent. But what we were able to do this year is we did a lot of things with technology to make us more efficient so we didn't have to hire more people. We did targeted recruitment for positions. We started taking a look at positions and trying to merge them using talents that we had within our organization, but bringing new talent into the organization. In DPW alone, they've saved $600,000 by bringing services back in-house and doing things differently. We have made some significant strides with our employees. I know a lot of residents understood that there were some issues with unions and things of that nature in 2010. We've built and repaired relationships with them, and they have worked so hard to give us amazing concessions within our union contracts. We had some unions that actually hadn't had a raise in over 8 years. Another thing that our employees have done beyond taking pay cuts and concessions has really worked hard with our human resources department to really control healthcare costs. We're actually this year, for the first time ever, seeing a significant savings in healthcare of almost $600,000, which according to Blue Cross Blue Shield and our insurance agent is almost unheard of because of the strides that we've been making and focusing on creative ways for wellness and things of that nature. So that helps our budget immensely in being able to work more with less, and we've continued to do that. I think that one question always comes up as well: if you were able to do this great with fewer employees, maybe you had too many. And that's not necessarily the case. You have to work smarter and different as time moves on, and using technology and just changing the way that you do business. I think it's important to note that I think we found our sweet spot, meaning that we can maintain what we have right now in a positive manner, but going much below the staffing we have now, you will see an impact on services. But right now, I believe with the team that we have in place, our employees work incredibly hard. We work very different. Our employees embrace change, and that has been the reason why we've been able to sustain such a significant cut to our workforce. I mean, 30% of your workforce is very significant, and I think we're all very proud of what we've done with that, and we've been able to keep those costs down.
Yeah, in fact, you talk about performance too. Since we've began doing some restructuring internally, I know the police department, this is a really good example. I believe in 2009 they reduced their officer count by, I think, 10 officers. And since 2009, they've restructured internally. And you'll notice that crime rates now, this is where they were at. This is an aggregate in 2009. This is number of crimes. And again, these charts are over there if you want to take a look at them after this. You can see where we're at in 2015. So that's a significant decline. A lot of that's due to the leadership of the chief of the police department and how they've chosen to take this to restructure and roll with it.
So again, sometimes there are benefits to having to make sacrifices, and that's what we've actually spent the last 5 years doing, is how can we work smarter, how can we work harder, and how can we work with less? And I think we have done that, but we do agree at this point, we've kind of hit the floor of what we can do with the staff that we have. So we have been working very hard to save money, and had we not been able to do that, we would be in a much different situation and probably a different service level. So we're really proud of the service level that we're delivering at this point. I think that the other question is, well, what if we vote no? And I think we did just talk about what we've been doing with the employees we have, and I talked a little bit about the floor that we're at. But losing the heavy would be a 15% budget cut for us in the general fund. And so if I look at that personally, and I took a 15% budget cut to my own personal budget, that's more than not going out to dinner once a week. That's significant sacrifices. For me, I'd probably lose my TiVo, and that's very important. So for other people, it's a car payment. So there's things at that point, it's significant in the fact that when you take a look at 15% in your own budget, that's what the city would take. It's important that to look at most cities, all cities are running generally the same. And what that is that the bulk of the cost of running a municipality is to personnel, because we're service delivery. That's what we provide as a service. And 65% of the general fund budget of that 17 million, or 18 million, is personnel costs. 55% of that are police and fire. So the bottom line is that everybody's going to take a cut and it's going to take a hit with that reduction. But police and fire being 55% of our budget, there's no way that they're going to be able to speak those cuts as well. And as I said before, both police and fire have done amazing work with the staff that they have. To lose more of that would be an adjustment in service delivery. I know recreation has taken a significant cut as well. So you would see that across the board. And that it's not something that we want to be able to see, and it's not meant to scare anybody. It's just the reality is 15% is a significant portion of the budget. We will have, as we talked about before, staff is staying after. If you have more specific questions on what kind of service delivery would that look like, we have both the police and fire chief are here to talk on that as well as other department heads. But if that is the bottom line, is that we've done everything we can internally to save money as much as possible and create efficiencies, but the 15% would be critical to our operations. With that, I think the question always also comes up is, we are one of the highest tax rates in Oakland County. We want to talk a little bit about that and why that seems that way. I think it's important to have that information. And Joe's going to go over a little bit more about how that fits and how we fit within Oakland County.
Yeah, so a lot of what we're talking about is the mill rate and the mill rate that we can levy. Well, what does that mean? There's an assumption out there, and we've heard of it at City Hall, that Ferndale is the highest taxed city in the county. Well, we want to kind of help you understand what goes into that statement. So what we've done is just assembled a real small sample of cities in Oakland County, kind of measuring the polar levels from the mill rate perspective. So you have this Ferndale right now situated here, third on this list, is the third highest. But we want you to take a step forward and look past the mill rate and look at this column right here. And this is called mill value. And that is, what is the value of our property? What makes up a mill? What makes up a mill is the value of all the city's residential property, all the city's commercial property, all of our businesses downtown, and all of our industrial property. And then you have your personal property tax that those businesses pay. If you pull all that together, that is your tax base, and that goes into the value of our mill. So the value of our mill is also situated similarly through the chart. You'll notice too, I did want to point this out, that this millage doesn't include the 1.96 millage that's dedicated to the Ferndale Library. So we have to keep that in mind. We have the mill rate, we have the mill value. The value is the important piece of the pie there. You'll notice that there's a direct correlation between a city's taxable value and our mill rate. This chart showed you, and again, this is available over here if this is hard for you to see. Please take your time after. This particular chart is the last on the tables. You'll notice here you have the taxable value and the mill rate. Well, here's the number of houses in the left column, and here's the value of that citywide residential property. So all the households in that city, this is where the valued at. So we have Hazel Park, Oak Park, Ferndale, Berkeley, Royal Oak, and Birmingham. This is the situation in the marketplace, and this is where Ferndale is in the marketplace. So what this really tells you is the value, a mill rate really equates to what your property is worth. So it takes more Ferndale, we'll call them property dollars, to meet one Birmingham dollar. That's really what that means. So it just, we have a higher mill rate to achieve the same amount of revenue. And again, I'll be available and I'll be happy to sit down with anyone who'd like to talk about this afterwards so we can go through those charts. I have a good example of this that really is pertinent to what we're talking about. So as you see in proposal 3, we're about to go out for a bond proposal for local streets for you guys to consider. Last year in November, Royal Oak did the same thing. And Royal Oak passed a $50 million streets bond. And I called them up and I said, hey, what are you expecting to levy and what are you expecting to get in return? So Royal Oak is levying 2.5 mils and they expect that to generate about $6 million in revenue going for the streets proposal. For Ferndale to generate the same $6 million, we would have to levy about 12 mils. So you have 12 mils to levy $6 million. Royal Oak would have to levy 2.5 mils to get the $6 million. So that kind of gets you, it's not, there's not a correlation with the highest tax. It's not that we're the highest tax, it's just the value of your mill, and that's all. Everybody understand?
So we just have a couple more questions, frequently asked questions that we're actually going to talk a little bit more about the streets and the parks bond request, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. Is there any, make sure that if you have any more cards that we'll keep picking up. We have some more over here. Great. So Joe is going to talk a little bit about the big question actually is the state has is asking us to pay for roads. I don't understand. Why is the city asking to pay for roads? And that's a very significant question. I'm going to have Joe explain that to you as well.
Yeah, we've received that a lot as well since February. And I want to clarify one thing. The state's proposal 1 has nothing to do with the city's local streets. And it has nothing to do with what we have put forth in proposal 3. Proposal 1 from the state is about funding state roads and state highways. In the city of Ferndale's jurisdiction, there's only 2. That's 8 Mile and Woodward. That's where that funding goes to. So proposal 1 from the state, that's what they're talking about funding. What we're saying is we have a lot of local streets in the Ferndale, and we don't get any funding from the state. Cities are expected to self-fund themselves as far as doing long-term maintenance and repairs and rehabilitation of our own local street network. So what we did last year is we had the city's engineer go out and evaluate the city's road network. I think there's a general results of that analysis over there. We also blew that up for you to kind of take a look at. But this is really it in a nutshell. You have our miles of roads, and over here you have poor, fair, good, and excellent. Now we're talking about, this is a lot of colors to be translating to you right now, but let's just jump to 2014, and you're looking at 18% of our roads, almost 20% of our roads are in poor condition right now, locally. You have about 45% fair, and you have about, I lost myself here. 3.67, does that say? And good. And very few and excellent. So we have this broken down again over there. But really what I want to drive home is that we are responsible for maintaining our local street infrastructure. And we put, to give you an idea of what local streets are, so examples of local streets to help you visualize that. Here we have some cracked pavement with Camborne and Leland, East Troy and Woodward and Paxton. These are example slides, and I can send you these slides if you want. They're also available on the website if you want to look at them. The city has a 2015 ballot proposals page that you can go to. And these are just some examples of what streets that are rated poor look like. So this could lead into what streets will be fixed, and is mine on the list. Well, every street, every local street is intended to be covered in the 15-year capital improvement plan. So this funding for the road streets will be used for all streets, whether it be repair or rehabilitation over a 15-year period as part of the streets capital improvement plan. So yes, all the streets should be touched.
There's one more caveat that has also come up, is that part of the proposal one with the state also indicates that there might be some revenue sharing increase with the 4 cities. It hasn't been determined yet, but it's about 3%. For us, that's about, I think, 225 or just under 200,000, I think it is. $200,000, give or take. That has come up a couple of times. Again, we want to reiterate as much as possible that it is the intent that we don't have to levy the entire heavy override. So if we do get revenue from the state, it would be our intention that we would not need to take that money for the heavy because we're getting that revenue from somewhere else. And so that is important to note. However, it's also important to note that the state doesn't always come through with what they say. So we may not get that money. But if we do, that would be the intent, is that we would toggle the heavy override to meet the revenue sharing that we get from the state if there's any increase from what we currently have.
And I just wanted to talk one more. This is kind of a summary slide. And this talks about the importance of reinvesting in your local infrastructure. Poor roads can depict a community in decline. Poor roads can be obstructive to vehicle safety, causing greater wear and tear. But really the most important point is doing nothing delays the inevitability of degradation. The roads aren't going to get better on their own. So you either fund it now, or it's going to have to be funded later because the roads are just going to continue to degrade. And the longer you wait, it's like anything else. The longer you wait, the worse conditioned it is, the more costly it is to improve it. We're letting those fair roads get down to a poor level. And once they're down to a poor level, they're even more expensive. The other piece of proposal 3 speaks about park improvements. So I want to clarify the numbers too. This is a $45 million bond. About $43 million goes to the local street improvements. About $2 million, 1.9, of that goes towards park improvement investments. So these park improvement investments, there's a general listing of what's been proposed that would be eligible for the bond dollars. These projects came from a list, were vetted by a list from the recreation plan, the city's recreation plan, by the Parks Blue Ribbon Commission that assembled, I believe, in 2013. And they were put forth by our Parks Commission, our resident Parks Commission. So that is what is behind this list of projects. So all these projects are vetted through resident-led initiatives and lists and plans. If this bond were to be approved by the voters, the $1.9 million park improvement investments would be considered in the first release of the bond dollars. So that means these would be just part of the first schedule of bond dollars. We could expect these projects to, the city move forward with these projects by 2018. That's what you could expect.
So that is the frequently asked question portion of this this presentation. We actually have quite a few questions here. Are there more questions that we can take from you? And then also, it's important to know that when we're done with this question portion, if there has been more questions that you have or that you want to talk specifically to department heads, we are going to be staying after and engage with all of you if you have more questions. We have our chief of police here, we have our chief of fire, we have our community economic development director, we have our DPW department, our DPW director and deputy director and engineer. We have Jill here for recreation and parks. We have our finance director here as well. So we have everybody here that you could ever ask any question to. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. How many, and then when we're done, the mayor is going to actually close the session here. How many of the Ferndale City Council members support passage of proposals 2 and 3? They're not necessarily asking who, just how many. I believe that the request and the ballot proposal was a 5-0 yes vote. Here's this one. What is the major area of city costs and projected increases? Has the city locked themselves into wage increases? Actually, the majority of our costs tend to be in healthcare and retirement, and as it relates to personnel costs, we're actually been very proud of how we've been doing, how we've been working with our employees as it relates to wage increases. First of all, most of our employees got their first increase, if you will, last year, since about 2000, some from 2007, some from 2008, and some in 2009. But what we've done is we've been very creative to not lock ourselves into sustained pay increases. So for instance, when you give somebody like a 3% raise or whatnot, that stays with them forever and you're stuck with that legacy. This last year we did some creative changes with some of our unions for those contracts where we offered a one-time salary adjustment of, I think some were 2%, some were just 1%, where it was just a one-time and it doesn't actually carry over. So we didn't lock ourselves in too heavy to wage increases. And no, we're actually not locked into wage increases. In fact, we have two of our unions are in negotiations now. They expire at the end of this fiscal year. And then our police and fire actually expire in 16 and 17. So we don't have 10-year contracts that we're locked into, and we'll continue to be good stewards of the revenue and with our unions to try to create creative ways of helping to support their needs for increases as well, but also how they can continue to give concessions. We're just changing the way that we're doing business to try to decrease legacy costs. It's also important to note that we're one of the very few communities that have really eliminated most legacy costs. Most of our new employees and a lot of the current employees don't get retiree health care like they did in the past. We don't have defined benefit pensions anymore. Everybody has a defined contribution, which means just a percentage. So when they leave employment with the city, we've really locked down our legacy costs, which was a significant portion of our budget in the past. So we've made a lot of changes that way. So no, we're actually not locked into significant personnel increases. What is the incentive for the city to reduce the amount of the override over time? How do we know you will? I'm actually going to turn this over to the mayor. That's a policy question.
Well, thank you, and it is a policy question. How do you know that you can trust this council to spend this money wisely if you continue to give us a renewal? And to some degree, we have to just ask you to trust us, and I know we're politicians, right, and maybe some of you snicker at that, but I think if you look at what we've done over the past several years, this is my 5th year as mayor, and we're actually spending less money today than we did the first year I became mayor. So we have continued to try to find creative ways to reduce the budget. This is not a council that has a history of blowing money on unnecessary things. You could elect a council like that in the future. I don't think you will, because I think our voters are very observant about what council does. I know you come to council and you watch what we do, but I think if you've watched what we have done financially over the last at least 5 years that I've been mayor, you will see that we have reduced our costs each and every year. We're spending less today than we did the day I became mayor, and at least as long as I'm mayor, we will continue to be good stewards of your money. And you can trust that or not, I understand that, but we have tried to be very good stewards of your money. And as April mentioned before, we have not, Joe, I have to correct you. The very first year of the Headley, we were only allowed to go up to, I think, 3.5%. Is that right, Greg? We couldn't go to the full 5.4. But even, pardon me? 3.13. But even in the second year and the third year, when the voters allowed us to go up to 5.4, the full amount, we did not. We only spent what we thought we absolutely needed. And that included, again, more years with no raises for our employees. I'm almost embarrassed to say how many years our employees went without raises. Last year was the first year that most of them got raises in years, and even then it was like 1.5% on average. So we have done, I think, a lot to make sure that we hold the costs down, and you can hold us accountable for that.
I think we did answer this question, but it says there have been TV ads lately concerning a tax proposal supporting street repair. Isn't that a state proposal? And again, that is different. That covers the state roads, which for the city of Ferndale would be 8 Mile and Woodward. And our proposal just covers the local roads and a portion of the park. Also, actually there's a question on that one somewhere else, but we'll get to that in just a second. So they are the only part that this would have an impact on the city is the fact that we would get a little bit, we potentially could get a little bit more revenue sharing, but again, the way the state works, you're never sure you're going to get that. But the intent would be, if we received more revenue from the state, we wouldn't need as much of the headly. Does the city still have to jump through hoops to get the state revenue sharing? That was a lot of staff time, wasn't it? We will always have to jump through a lot of hoops to get money from the state. But we'll take it. So we're hoping that that does indeed come to fruition, because the more revenue we get from the state, the less we have to take from our residents. I think we've lost over $1 million in state shared revenue since 2007, I believe. Oh, but one of the questions, what sort of park improvements are proposed if Proposal 3 passes, and please be specific? We actually, Lloyd and Jill and the Parks Commission actually worked very hard. We have a Parks and Recreation master plan. They took a look at that. We also did a update of the recreation master plan. And we also, there was quite a few other things that they did. Greg, I kind of put you on the spot and talk a little bit about how you determined what project.
We took the Parks and Rec master plan, those suggestions within the master plan, and then the Blue Ribbon Commission, which was done a couple of years ago, we took those suggestions, and then we had the members of the commission themselves talk about, what do you want in the parks? What do your neighbors want? And so we put this great big list together of about 30 different improvements, and then the commission decided to list them all out, and we voted on them, and everybody got kind of simple. Everybody got like 8 dots, and you put dots by your favorite ones, and the ones with the most dots were the ones that we selected, and that's what this list comes to: the splash pad, the skate park, the climbing boulders, those type of new improvements, as well as doing repairs to existing equipment, doing some repairs here at the Kulik Center. My understanding is there's been no real investment in the Kulik Center since it opened back in the 90s. So it's been over 20 years since we've put any kind of real money into this building. But that's basically how we came to get the list that we have today.
It's also important to note that should this renewal of the streets and the parks bond happen, that we're actually front-loading the parks. So actually the parks, we will let that bond out sooner. We don't have to wait the whole 15 years to see those improvements. We will do those right away, which is nice for those that are anxious to have park improvements. How do either ballot proposal 2 or 3 impact the so-called 360 proposal project? It actually has no bearing on the 360 project. Again, it's for general fund to do general operations for the city, which is your core services of police, fire, recreation, parks, and city hall functions. So, and then the streets proposal, again, is for streets and parks, for street repair and for parks. So it actually has no correlation with the 360. I hope I did answer that question okay. The Ferndale Housing Commission serves an area reaching far beyond the city of Ferndale. How will proposals affect the Ferndale Housing Commission? Again, we're actually not part of, the Ferndale Housing Commission is not part of the city's budget. They have their own budget. They work through HUD grants through the federal government. So we actually don't oversee the Ferndale Housing Commission. So the only, the benefit that they would have is, again, the use of our parks, our core services of police and fire, and things of that nature, and then, of course, streets. We do have a question here. Will the city use Proposal 3 money to continue to provide bike lanes, bike racks, such as on Livernois and Pinecrest? Some believe that this is a waste of needed money. One of the things that the city is committed to is complete streets. That is a very small portion of the $46 million that we're asking for roads. But it is, as much as it is important to have healthy roads, it's just as important to have bike lanes available for those that need to use their bike who don't have public transportation or walkable areas. So again, that's a very small portion of that $46 million, but complete streets is the component that we remain committed to that. So there will be some of that, but for the majority, it is just straight street repair.
Yeah, we have 2 more questions over here. The first one is, excluding the inflationary increases, what effect will new home sales have, considering they have considerably higher unkept values, which they do, on our projections? And that's true. So we are capped at increasing at the rate of inflation. The only time that a property gets reassessed to its current value would be during a home sale or new construction, if there's any new construction. So the question is, would we turn enough homes over and get them reassessed to have an impact on this projection year to year, 10 years out? No, we don't rely on that as being a significant factor. It is a factor, and we are seeing new families move into Ferndale. But of the 12,500 houses in Ferndale that we draw our tax base from, we don't anticipate a significant percentage of a turnover to really change the name of the game here. We're still counting on what we can expect from the fixed perspective when we project, less from the variable perspective. We can't anticipate fully how many houses will be turned over in the market. But that is a question that we have asked our assessor, and we do expect those results from the assessor. We'll be putting that information up just to give you an understanding of how home sales look like in recent history and what we might be able to expect. And that'll be posted to the city's website, which is ferndalemi.gov/government. And that'll take you right to the 2015 ballot proposals page. The second question gets a little bit back to the mill rate questions, which I was expecting. So this question really looks at how my Roy Loke comparison wasn't an apples to apples comparison, and that actually gets at to the heart of what we're trying to talk about here. And that's that comparing a city to any other city is never an apples to apples comparison. There is no apples to apples comparison. You have different levels of city services, different mixtures of your tax base. Some have heavier tax base relying on residential, some have no industrial tax base, some have no commercial tax base. So the tax bases are different. You really can't compare. But I think what we're saying is Roy Loke's a lot bigger, so let's look at something closer to Ferndale. And again, if you look at that next slide, it's over there on that chart, look at the households and the value when you compare, let's just say Ferndale and Berkeley. Ferndale has about 11,000 households, and our collective taxable value for all those households is about $344,000. That's what they're worth as a total. Berkeley has about 3,000 fewer households. They're at about 6,800, I believe, and their taxable value is about $410,000. So they have 3,000 less households, but their taxable value, million, I keep saying thousand. Let's all hope they're not that low. No, so Berkeley has 3,000 fewer households, but generates about $70 million more in worth and value, which means that gets back to the value of the mill. It's really a question of what is your mill worth? And Ferndale's mill, in that respect, is worth less than the city of Berkeley's.
Are there any other questions that need to be asked that we didn't ask, or that weren't asked already? We are actually going to bring the mayor up for some closing comments, but staff is going to stay. If you have any questions, or if you can't stay, we will take your name and number and call you personally. Yes, sir.
Branching off of the question you answered a moment ago about new home sales not affecting the inflation, or not including inflation, does that mean that those new home sales and proposal 2 will not be affected by potentially houses sitting empty, waiting to be sold, waiting to transfer ownership? Because there is a time period there from time to time. Say if somebody passes away or something, the owner passes away. Could that be a significant effect?
Well, I think again what we're getting back to is the individual cases, and we can project using the aggregate. The majority, we would have to reasonably assume that the majority of households in Ferndale won't have those characteristics. While we recognize there are some cases where that may or may not exist, those few cases won't have a large enough impact, I think is what we would be saying.
But if you have a specific scenario, we'd be happy to sit down and work that out with you. With that, I'm going to bring the mayor up.
Well, first of all, I hope you see that those of us on council are very proud of our staff. We have a very good staff who keeps good care of us. And let's have, I see someone's on applaud. I mean, our city manager and our staff work very hard and are very diligent with your tax dollars. I would also say that council is as well. You know, the Great Recession cost this city 25% of its taxable value, and that's where we get our revenue from. So we're here today because we lost 25% of our taxable value. And this is a community, at least as long as I've lived here for 25 years, that has valued the core services that we provide. We have, I'd say second to none, outstanding police and fire and DPW services, bar none. And I think we've all appreciated that. I didn't mean to exclude recreation, but you know, they've taken a heck of a hit over the years, and that's it. And in my opinion, it's time to reinvest in our parks so that families in our neighborhoods, families want to come here and live in our neighborhoods. So the bottom line to me and those on council is, if you want the level of services that we have today, this is currently what it costs. What you pay today is currently what it costs. So we need an extension, not an increase, but an extension in the Headley override in order to maintain the investment in services that we have today. And if we want to make sure that we keep our roads and our parks up to date, because nobody's going to come to our rescue. The state or the feds are not going to give us a bucket of money to fix our roads, folks. It's just not going to happen. So if we want good streets and we want good parks, we need to make that investment in ourselves, and that proposal actually would reduce your taxes by 1 mil. So a yes vote on 2 and 3 would reduce your overall taxes by 1 mil. Somebody asked the question of how did council vote on council, and we were all unanimous to put it on the ballot. I will go a step further and say all 5 of us are actively campaigning and supporting these 2 millages. I want you to know, we've heard for the last year the numbers that you've heard tonight. And to us, we believe that this is a community that wants these kinds of services. If not, we'll go back to the drawing board and figure out how to reduce our budget by 15%. But I think that this is a community that understands and values the services that we have, knows why it's important, and we humbly ask you for your support on May 5th for proposals 2 and 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for coming out on a rainy night, but I want all of, pardon? Oh, yes, the next town hall is going to be on Wednesday, April 29th, and that will be at City Hall. And if anybody has any questions, just for those who are watching cable, they have particular questions after watching this presentation, they can call 248-546-2360, and we'd be happy to sit down and talk with anybody who has any further questions. I want staff to please raise their hand so all of you know who the staff is. You can ask any of them any questions that you have. We will stay here. We will be here till about 8:30 to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.